Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, of course. I'm obviously very passionate about health and wellness. And the closest, in my experience, that traditional medicine comes to that is preventive medicine. And it seems, in my observation, that the cornerstone of traditional preventive medicine is vaccine therapy. And it's really, really difficult to convince people that that isn't an essential tool. But hopefully, with information and more education, we can start the process for more people to reconsider it. You had mentioned the legislation in New York about the healthcare workers, and for those who don't know, I just want to mention that this weekend, a judge in New York actually overturned that rule. So at this point, healthcare workers do not have to fear risk losing their jobs for refusing to get the H1N1 vaccine, which is a tremendous legislative victory, and really was the only practical way they had to address this was through the legal system. So we're really grateful for that. But I wonder also if you can comment on the, if people do receive these vaccines and they are injured, what is their recourse? I mean, in most legal systems, you would be able to file a lawsuit for injury and damages that were due from whoever put that vaccine together. Well, that changed because since you started, there is a strong political lobby from the drug companies to actually go to the government and through their legislation initiate legislation that provides complete insulation from any prosecution from them in the system, and I think it's called the Vaccine Injury Compensation Act. So if you could share a few words on that, I think our listeners would enjoy hearing that.
Well, in 1986, Congress passed the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act that did protect the manufacturers up to a certain point from lawsuits, vaccine injury lawsuits, as well as protect pediatricians, doctors who give vaccines from litigation in civil court. There is a federal vaccine injury compensation program. We had great hopes that that program would be implemented fairly, justly, and would provide an alternative to a lawsuit. Unfortunately, over the last few decades, it has been really what I call gutted, and by both the Departments of Health and Human Services and Justice, who are denying and fighting every claim. So it's very difficult to get federal vaccine injury compensation at this point. What's different about H1N1 swine flu vaccines is that when the National Public Health Emergency was declared, legislation that had been passed since September 11, 2001, BioShield legislation and other pieces of legislation, had actually completely shielded the vaccine companies from all lawsuits, as well as anyone who gives the vaccine from all lawsuits, because of this public health emergency. So the compensation program, which is in name only in the PrEP Act, P-R-E-P, PrEP Act, is not been funded yet by Congress. There is language in there about a federal vaccine injury compensation program for H1N1 swine flu vaccine injuries and deaths, but for all practical purposes, it's not in existence because it's not funded. So we don't know what's going to happen when people are injured by H1N1 swine flu vaccines. We know there will be no civil court litigation, absolutely precluded. But will there be a just, fair, expedited compensation by the government? Well, if you look back at 1976 swine flu vaccine, it took years for those victims of who had got Guillain-Barré syndrome, or the families of victims who died from swine flu vaccination in 1976, to get federal compensation. I expect that we may see the same thing with this swine flu, is it'll take years if Congress funds it.
It should be even worse because the process in 76 precluded the Vaccine Injury Compensation Act when it was easier actually to do this. Then the act just made it more difficult, as you mentioned.
The 1986 law, well, you know, I of course was back there then in the early 80s when the companies were threatening to leave the country without any vaccine. That is what Congress was responding to, was the threat by the companies to leave the market and leave the country with no vaccine. And remember, in the early 1980s, nobody knew anything about vaccine injury and death. The first time America really understood that the public understood that vaccines could cause harm was in April of 1982. The program DPT Vaccine Roulette was a documentary, was the first documentary, the first actual publicity in this country that vaccines could cause brain injury and death. So it was that documentary that galvanized the parents here in Washington, D.C. to found the nonprofit organization that's now known as the National Vaccine Information Center. And we worked with Congress in those early 1980s because we fought for as much as we could get for the families, because the companies and the doctors were threatening to stop vaccinating. And you got to remember, the climate back then was nobody understood how risky vaccination could be. So there was no internet, there were no fax machines, there were no cell phones. There was the snail mail and the landlines. That's what we had to work with back then. Very different time than it is today. Thankfully, today, we're all connected by the internet.
It makes a huge difference. And I just wanted to address a corollary point, which is an important one. If you watch the full 60 Minutes segment that was aired this past Sunday, you'll see that the end of the segment ends with an interesting full-blown ad to find out more where to get your swine flu vaccine, to go to their website. I mean, basically, it was almost a 15-minute infomercial for a swine flu vaccine. And, you know, they're really pushing it hard, not only on 60 Minutes, but all the, and I love 60 Minutes. Please don't misunderstand I'm not casting aspersions on it. It's one of my favorite, probably is my favorite show on television. I watched them for 40 years. They're a model of excellence in journalism. I have enormous respect for them. But it's just commenting on the fact that they are, it was basically a swine flu promotion, swine flu vaccine promotion, H1N1 flu vaccine promotion. And the point I want to make is that many people aren't aware, and I'm doing a video on this, a separate video, but earlier this year there was a swine flu task force that was initiated by the FDA and the FTC that essentially makes it illegal to make any, and let me capitalize any with huge bold letters, any claim that any product has any effect on swine flu, and then sell it. You can say it does, but if you sell it, they will devastate you. They will take you out of business. They'll throw you in jail. And interestingly, they are prosecuting this more aggressively than they are cancer therapies. And many may not know that earlier this week, Dr. Andrew Weil, one of the most prominent physicians in the country, got nailed with this. He got a letter from the FDA and the FTC for violating this new regulation, this new restriction. And I don't know what's going to happen to him, but this is just enormous. I mean, just to give you an example, if I was to sell vitamin D and make a video on my site and say that vitamin D works for swine flu, and say that, they could take that information and prosecute me under this new law.
Well, I think what you're seeing here is part of this paradigm shift. We're getting to a tipping point. There is the new paradigm, which is going toward a more natural approach to achieving and maintaining health that includes millions of people eating organic, joining health clubs to exercise, looking at vitamin therapy and other ways that are less toxic than pharmaceutical products, and in some cases certain vaccines which have been shown to have significant risk factors. As people are moving toward a more the alternative approach, the holistic approach to staying well, those who are holding on to the old paradigm, which is very much pharmaceutical dependent, are not happy. And so you're going to see more of this struggle and this sort of, what I say is really a persecution of those who are suggesting that there's another way to stay well. And I expect there will be more of that. But you know, if you look at the polls that have been taken in the United States in the last few weeks about how many people are going to use H1N1 swine flu vaccine, those numbers are relatively low. It looks as if anywhere from a third to a half to more people are taking a wait-and-see approach and are not going to line up and get the swine flu vaccine. I think this shows that the public is engaged in critical thinking, more critical thinking than they have in the past. And so it's going to be a challenge for government, health officials, to meet the people and to try to have a conversation that's not so much, I'm going to tell you what to do, you can't ask any questions, just do what I say, because what I'm saying is right. I mean, those days are gone. The paternalistic approach, the you do what I say approach and don't ask any questions, it's gone. And so there needs to be a new conversation.